Yo guys, and welcome to another video. Excuse my late upload this week, I wasn't home for a few days, but now I'm back and ready to make content again. So today's topic will be spending your gold, but it won't be directly related to item efficiency, since that's a whole different in-depth topic we can talk about in a future video. Most people have an idea which items are universally efficient to buy and which ones not as much, but it becomes a lot more difficult when items change from patch to patch. That's why it requires its own separate time to talk about. Today I'll focus on the questions: should I always spend my gold when leaving base, and should I buy this item just for an upcoming situation even if it's not the best in slot 1. Small disclaimer, everything I say is my opinion and how I view the game. If you or someone you look up to in the League community has a different opinion on the matter, that's totally fine. I'm not saying everything I say is how you should play the game. Rather, I'm sharing my opinion on how to be as efficient as possible with your gold so you don't end up wasting its potential. So, to answer the first question, the answer is straight up yes, 90% of the time at least. Early game, doesn't matter who you're playing, always try to spend your gold. As long as you're buying a component that your champion benefits from. That means do not buy longswords on Aurora. I've tried it and it's not good. And also buy the component as long as it's building towards your first item that you've deemed the best one in the current game. In the early stages of the game, it's almost impossible to not spend it, since most components are cheap and items like coal, tier 1 boots, dark seal, and of course refillable potion exist. All of these items are very efficient, by the way, if you're wondering. The 10% when you shouldn't spend your gold mainly comes from the mid to late game. If let's say the enemies are playing assassins like Zed, Rengar, Kiana, and you're playing a squishy mage, you need to get Zonias as soon as possible if they end up getting fed, since without it, you can never match them on side lane, and in teamfights it's almost impossible to even exist. So if you end up in base with 800 gold and you have already purchased Seeker's Arm Guard, you should for sure hold the gold for a needlessly large rod. And finish Zonias as soon as possible. Another example, let's say your comp is almost full AP. For some reason, you decided not to dodge it. You're playing Aurora, and the enemies eventually will stack a lot of MR. Your second or third item should absolutely be Void Staff depending on how much magic resist they're buying. At one point in the game, you're in base. This is your inventory and gold. You're a little bit short on finishing Lightning Jewel, but you can buy an Amplifying Tome. You might be asking, why would I buy something that doesn't progress my Void Staff? As everything in the game, it's context dependent. If let's say nothing in theory should be happening in the next 2 to 3 minutes whilst you're farming for your item, no reason to spend your gold immediately. But let's say the enemies are currently in a very winning position. They have 3 dragons and soon the 4th one will spawn. You need to contest it, which means that you won't have enough time to farm up for your component. In this position, I would always recommend you to spend your gold for the extra Amplifying Tome. You can always find something to build it into later. Spending your gold now will potentially give you the needed power to swing a fight in your favor. And this is what I call a tempo buy. This is a perfect segue to the second question. I named it this way because it gives instant power right now in exchange for delaying a future power spike. And I'll be honest, I use this a lot in my games, not just on Aurora. Let's look at a few examples of this. In this first game I'm playing Gwen versus this enemy team comp. Ideally, my core build will be Riftmaker into Nashers. When it comes to boots though, I have a few options. But it's still capped since the enemy team comp is primarily physical damage and both side laners that will match me on side later on are physical damage centric. Mark threats because they do have a fair bit of CC and a decent chunk of magic damage. Or just ignore the defensiveness since whichever option you choose from these you'll be vulnerable to the other source of damage since the enemies do have a decent mixture of it. Thus you can go Sork boots. But with all these options, the one I went for is this. And while these boots somewhat make sense, I didn't buy them because I prefer them over the alternatives. I bought them because at the time of purchase, I had the exact amount of gold for them and they are a very good tempo power spike if I use them as one. Let me show you what I mean. Here as you can see, I've already finished my Riftmaker and my gold is exactly enough to get Swifties. I'm currently ahead in the matchup, now I want to extend my advantage. So instead of buying something like a recurve bolt towards my next item, I buy Swifties for the following reasons. I'm strong, so I want to use it. Enemy Gnar has no teleport and I know I can play for the opposing turret. In order to do so, I need to be as strong as possible and Swifties happen to be my biggest power spike I can get right now. Enemy camps are respawning and my jungler is coming topside, so even if I don't end up getting the tower, I could end up rotating faster to a potential fight. With these things in mind, what I'm doing is basically giving myself the biggest chance for success right now at the exchange of buying my Nashers at a slightly later time. And the counter argument for this line of thinking is, but you're slowing down your scaling. And to that I say you're absolutely correct. On a champion like Gwen who becomes online on 2 items generally, it could end up being a pretty big deal. But the way I see things is that if you're given an opportunity to impact the game right now, if you buy a certain item, and if you think that the positives from doing it will outweigh the negatives that will come later, you should do it. In this case, I just ended up getting the tower, but if there were a fight, I would have been the strongest I could be at the time. Now, one thing I want to clarify though, I'm trying to give the best examples that are not results driven, as in I'm all up for learning from whether a situation goes good or bad, but the results themselves are not the only factor when deciding whether a decision was a good one, because you're never 100% sure whether a play is going to go your way. You can be 99% sure, but human error happens because there's too many variables going into a decision. Instead of fighting against it, you should accept and always improve not only from the result, but from the environment that was around you when making the decision. This next example is a good one to demonstrate that. Just to set the scene, I'm playing Shen versus Mundo. Even though I end up killing him, the game doesn't start very good, since our gank on bot side didn't go our way, resulting in the enemy jungler getting 3 kills. Notice how I'm able to shove the wave after killing my opponent. This is very crucial when making the next upcoming decision. I end up recalling with a pretty significant chunk of gold, and this is where I'm given the choice between Jan's belt and refillable for maximum gold efficiency, Bammy's cinder plus refillable for more wave clear. I could have also went for Kindle Gem plus refillable if I wanted to be more ult orientated. Or a very interesting decision that I was given in this specific game, which is Swiftness Boots. And you're probably asking yourself, why? And to answer that, this is where the environment comes into play. It's not always about which buy is the most efficient in a game, rather which one is the best one in this specific game. While I was recalling, I was looking at the situation that was happening in our jungle. Sadly, Overwolf didn't record, so I can't show you the live footage. What I saw in real time was what you're seeing on the screen right now. Enemies are overextending in our jungle, and it seemed like an appropriate time to be there. Via my tempo purchase, I was able to make a difference, since we were able to clean up and even chase down the Lulu. But the result itself, again, is not the important part. The backbone of this operation was the fact that I knew that I had time to roam because of the wave state that I left on top lane, especially because I still have teleport. Swiftness boots are pretty good in this game since the enemy team comp has a good mixture of damage. Neither plated steel caps nor mercs give a ton of value, but swiftness provide instant tempo value due to them giving the most amount of movement speed. Also my awareness. Paying attention to the minimap but also panning your camera to look at the situation goes a long way, even as a top laner, so make sure you know all of your options when you make a decision. Alright, so you showed us 2 examples, but both of them feature swiftness boots. Can you do this with any other item? Absolutely. I would argue that you can do this with almost any item if the situation presents itself. Before we continue though, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe, drop a like, and if you want to, let me know anything you enjoyed or didn't enjoy about the video in the comments down below. Going into the last example, I was facing someone who didn't particularly care about his KDA, given that he was trying to play like a certain Scion player, going for good devs without the good in them. For the most part. Against these type of players, let it be Singe, Scion, or anyone who you know you can snowball into, Darkseal can be the ultimate tempo buy, because of the potential to make you really strong as long as you manage to get it rolling. Even if you lose a few stacks in the process, it's not a big deal, since the item itself is extremely efficient. Most of the time, I even buy this on champions like Shen. Now, whether you turn this into a Magi Soul Stealer is up to you and the game itself. I personally rarely buy Magi Soul Stealer since unlike its predecessor, it can end up biting you back pretty badly. It's a high risk, high reward kind of item. You can even call it a win more item and those are generally looked down upon. My advice if you're considering buying Magi is be absolutely sure that it's a good game for it, as in you're strong enough to keep stacking it, and also try to close out the game as soon as possible so no further complications arise. This is exactly the type of game I purchased it into. If you're ahead as I am, buying it in theory should suffice what you exactly need. Immediate power to end the game as soon as possible, but this wasn't the only tempo buy I went for. After I made a calculated def with my already purchased Magi, I had this amount of gold in my inventory and there's a bunch of items I can go for here, but what I'm aiming for right now is to end the game via my accumulated lead. Thus, I need more damage. In order for me to maximize my damage output, around this time in the game is when I'd want more ability power, percentage magic pen, or high damage passives from items. Not flat magic pen or the storm surge ability, which is mainly early game orientated. But I built the components for it anyway. There's a few reasons for that. is the item that gives me the most raw efficiency in terms of damage right now, and I want to close out the game as soon as possible. Storm Surge is still a good buy in this game if it ends up dragging on, given the enemies only have one tank. I want to preserve my Doran's Ring, since it's a pretty efficient item, until later on when I absolutely need to sell it. If I had enough gold for 2 needlessly large rods or a Hextech alternator plus one of the needlessly large rods, those would be my preferred options. There's actually one more alternative option that I was debating on, which is tier 3 boots plus alternator, which I think is the second best buy in this specific case. But the problem with that buy is that tier 3 boots are a bit iffy. I tried to buy them at least 3 completed items because actual items are still better than them in most situations. The game played out in a way that I didn't get much to do. The buy didn't matter at all since everyone was winning. But I wanted to show you how I problem solve a situation like this on what item to buy, and these are my justifications. Sometimes, as you see, it will be a gray area on what to buy and you'll have reasons to get different options. The important part is when you're making the decision, you take everything in consideration, including tempo. Thank you for watching the video. As always, I highly appreciate your time and I'll see you in the next one.